comes to about grade 4, 5, 6, 7, kids are making decisions about going on in science. And the trouble is, at the moment, we're getting kids opting out, not opting in. And in part it's that they just don't understand it. But if we get them to engage in conversations about it, if we get them to be part of it, posing their questions, we can get them to be excited about science. And importantly, part of that is the language of science. If we can get them to be comfortable with how science gets represented across all the different modes, then they can become comfortable in understanding that science is no different to any other subject in that it is complex, but it requires confidence in being able to engage in it. So being able to see that any topic in science is multimodal, but being comfortable with that really promotes a sense of being engaging in the topic. And we seriously believe that if we can get kids to that, we'll get more kids doing science than currently is what's happening. If we look at mathematics and science, both of those are languages. If we can get kids comfortable with the language, get comfortable with exploring, get comfortable in their own self about learning, we believe we'll get more kids doing science more often, and therefore we'll get them going into the science careers for which we as a nation are short of. When we look at what happens in a classroom, it's very complex. It's not about teacher giving to student, student giving back to teacher. When we look at what they're doing in classrooms, they have to not only understand the science ideas that they're working with, they also have to engage with the language. And language is very critical, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And they also have to understand what it means to have dialogue, what it means to be involved in a conversation. And these elements are operating at the same time. Simple question. Can we do any science? Can we do anything without language? And the answer is no. Kids have to talk to each other, they have to debate, they have to negotiate. As we say, we negotiate ideas, not people. That is really critical, given today's world in which we race to positions where any conversation is about you're picking on me. We have to remove that from our classrooms. And for us, getting kids to understand this means that they then get free of anybody picking on them. The environment's non-threatening, and we start to set up these places in which language becomes a really valuable tool. And they understand that they can use their own natural language, but they have to develop and come towards the science language. And it's this negotiation that happens between students and students, students and teachers, that really gives us this idea that I can own the knowledge that we have. Kids become involved in negotiation when they understand that they're not going to get a response from the teacher to give them the idea that this is right or wrong, that they collectively have to work together, that they've got confidence in each other, that the ideas will be debated and it's not their person that gets debated, but that the teacher will help them get to the correct understanding as they explore text, as they explore this, all the information from the websites to see, yes, we actually got what scientists think is the right answer. And for us, that's really important. It's not about me as an instructor giving you, the learner, the information. That just doesn't work. It works for some, it doesn't work for most of them. What's really critical is I, as the instructor, provide an environment where there's lots of engagement, there's lots of challenges, and you, the learner, have a place in there for which you then generate understanding. The next generation science standards wants teachers to use science as an argumentative tool that helps people understand. When we think, we've got to use stuff like we've got to analyze, we've got to synthesize, we've got to solve, we've got to generate models. These are things that we do all the time. What we've been able to show is that 2 years after a kid has been in an SWH classroom, their cognitive development in terms of the ways in which these attributes are connected are significantly better than kids who don't. that their results in mathematics are significantly better coming out of a science writing heuristic classroom, significantly better in language. That is work that we can do where we challenge kids cognitively, where they're able to negotiate, promotes much richer thinking, and it's having benefit not just now, but delayed benefits. That's what we're trying to track. That's what we're tracking. Our most recent study, a 3-year study, showed again critical thinking growth rate was significantly advanced. Kids' mathematics scores were being advanced, greater than they were before. Excitingly, what we do is we close achievement gaps. We're working with a school which is about 70% Hispanic. When we look at the critical thinking gap as those kids started this process, the gap between the Hispanic kids and the white kids was huge. At the end of 2 years, they've caught up. We've closed it. We've actually closed that critical thinking gap. That's incredibly exciting. It's demonstrating that it's not that these kids can't think, it's just that we're not providing educational opportunities for them to think in ways that are really to where they're at, to build their understanding of the science knowledge, etc. So when we look at these results, when we look at kids with disadvantage who suffer because of language, who suffer because of the ways in which their learning environment is structured so they can't become involved, when we change that environment, when we get them involved in talking, in posing questions, in generating their claims and evidence, when they take ownership of that, we can cognitively challenge them. We can push them beyond where they think they can go. They have to think. And it's in this thinking moment where there's non-threatening, where we begin to see them grow. We begin to see them shine. We begin to see them really push beyond it. This is how we close these gaps. The idea of using the critical thinking test, while there's always going to be flaws about any test that we use, it does enable us to look at kids' development over time and at scale. And that's why we've used it. And as they take on this test and as they do it 2 or 3, 4 times, we're able to see this development, see how they shift, their rate of growth. And that's what for us is important, because our arguments for other researchers, for education policy people, is these approaches. The SWH is an approach that could be replicated in other areas. For example, in history, there's some work that's looking at reasoning in history. And we're getting, wherever these types of approaches are used, we're getting these gaps closed. So it's not just the SWH, it's can we get kids involved in learning? Can we get them to negotiate? And the answer is yes, and when we do, we close gaps. We have to think about why that gap closes. As I said before, teaching is about, we've always thought about teaching as transfer. I transfer, you get. When we shift that away from saying all learning occurs inside a kid's head, then teachers have to set up environments for which they stand back. They have to allow kids to have a voice. I'm always intrigued by people who tell me kids can't argue, because we know kids argue naturally. They're very good at arguing with each other about bedtime, about the car, getting the car, about anything. But it's when we start to say we've got to get science argument, oh, that's different. The structure of it is a little bit different to general argument, but every kid can argue. Every kid can defend. Every kid can put ideas out there. Every kid wants to defend. Who's the best football team? Who's the best singer? Who's the best whatever? So we just have to provide an opportunity for them to be able to argue. That's essentially what we do when in terms of the SWH. We get the teacher out of the road. We get kids to be in non-threatening where they negotiate ideas, and they therefore get to argue about those in a friendly manner. And it's when they understand that they're not going to be picked on. It's not about them, it's about their idea. And it's when it gets to that stage that we really get kids involved.